Welcome to episode 32 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Riggaby. On Stageworthy, I interview people who make theater, actors, directors, playwrights, and more, and talk to them about everything from why they chose the theater to their work process and anything in between. Ryan Sero is a Hamilton-based actor and writer and the artistic director of Artword Theatre. Ryan's play Anybody Else is currently playing to rave reviews at the Hamilton Fringe Festival. Our conversation was recorded at the Baltimore House in Hamilton. You can find Stageworthy on Facebook and Twitter at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website at StageworthyPodcast.com. If you like what you hear, I hope you'll subscribe on iTunes or Google Music or whatever podcast app you use, and consider leaving a comment or rating.
Anybody Else.
Anybody Else?
Yeah, Anybody Else. It's a comedy about a guy trying to find himself and trying to find the meaning of life and happiness and save his relationship if he can. All with the help of Sigmund Freud.
Is it a one-person show or is it
three people?
3 people?
Yeah, 3 people. I play the lead. And sort of like a half other part kind of thing. Mm-hmm. The other 2 actors play 3 or 4 parts each.
Is it written by you?
Yes, it is.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And you're producing it yourself?
And I'm producing it.
Yeah.
I'm not quite the raving egomaniac that it would take to direct it as well.
No.
So I've got Tyler Brent is directing it.
It's important to have that outside eye.
I feel like I could do any 2 of the 3. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say the big 3, even though I recognize that sound design and costume design and choreography and stuff, it's all extremely important to a show as well. I'm not knocking those ones, but to me, when I say the big 3, I'm talking about directing, acting, and writing.
Yeah, I feel for myself like I could write and I could act, but I don't think I could direct if I'm acting.
Yeah.
Because I don't have...
Yeah, and that to me would be the hardest hurdle to jump over, would be to be able to direct yourself.
Yeah.
And I've seen it done. I've seen it where people have done all 3, or where people have directed and starred in, and you go, that actually was good. But I've also seen it go the other way, where you look at their performance and you're like, see, you thought you were pushing yourself, and you really weren't.
I think it's rarer than people think to be able to direct yourself successfully.
I think it's because we have a bad example set by Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I think it works in Hollywood because you can watch the dailies.
Well, you can not only watch the dailies, you can have immediate playback, so you can finish your shoot, go over and see how it looked, and decide if it's a thing that you're going to keep.
Yeah. I didn't like that. I didn't like when I did that thing. I'm going to do a 3rd take, and we're going to do it this way this time. Yeah. Absolutely. Whereas with, and even then, it requires a very self-critical eye who can recognize the scene's not working and it's my fault because I'm doing this, and even that would be a very. But we see it done successfully, and this is the other thing, is that when we see it done, it's because it worked.
Yes.
You know, we see it done by certain people who do it, because not every director approves their own work with good reason. And when we see it done, we go, see, they did it, you know. And I think that oftentimes we think, therefore, I can do it, even though in order to get to that position, such and such a director, actor has done 25 years of studying and careful, meticulous advancement in their work.
Yeah. I think also, in theater, it can work as long as the director is directed by an assistant director who he trusts implicitly to direct him, which again, in some cases, can be pretty rare to find that. This is my first year in the Hamilton Fringe. Have you?
Welcome.
Thank you. Have you been in the Hamilton Fringe Festival?
A long time now.
Yeah?
My first participation, I wasn't a show in, but I was a volunteer in, was in 2008, I think. Was my first one, and I volunteered, and it was the first time I'd earlier that year I'd heard about Fringe festivals. A director friend of mine told me about them, and I was like, Fringe, that sounds like fun, because I was just out of school, and I was saying, what do I do next? And he was going, okay, well, you do this and this and this, and you talk to these kinds of people, and you try to get your name out this way. And he says, Fringe Festival's great. And I'm like, Fringe, what is Fringe?
Yeah.
And he says this, and so I go on the website, I say, I want to volunteer. And that year, I was a maniac volunteer. I was there, I think, as much as, well, probably not, but 3/4 of the time that the producers of the Fringe were there, I was there. Just because I signed up for 30 some odd shifts, which are an hour long each, or something like that.
That's the best kind of volunteer, though. That's the volunteer that's gung ho. That's the kind of volunteer that you want.
Because I wanted to learn and I wanted to meet people, right? And I discovered that the best one was the best volunteer job was usher. Mm-hmm. Because if you're a ticket taker, you take a bunch of tickets and then you slyly slide in the doors and you get to watch a show.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if they still do it, but at that point in time, any shift you picked up at the Fringe as a volunteer, they would give you a little token, or maybe every 3 or something like that, they would give you a little pass and you could go see a show.
Yeah.
It was a volunteer pass to see a show, and so I would go and I would usher a show, and then I would see that show, and then I would go see another show with my pass. So I would double down, and so I saw a ton of shows that year. Some really great stuff and some really appalling stuff, which is I think the best part about a Fringe.
There is no better way to learn than to see some garbage.
And I've talked to friends about it, and our least favorite Fringe experiences are the ones that were mediocre. Where you're it was neither here nor there. I didn't really care. I kind of fell asleep a little bit, but not. It wasn't so appalling. Our favorite experiences are the ones that blow our minds and move us.
Yeah.
Or the ones where we just want to yell stuff at the stage because we're going, I can't believe you put that on stage.
Well, I mean, there's a certain passion to that. If you're seeing something that's mediocre, you have no passion. You're like, this thing. But then if you hated it, you've got something to rant about. And if you loved it, you've got something to rave about. And those are the two extremes that I think would stay with us.
Yes, they do.
Yeah,
they do. It can be just, especially if all of your friends went to see the appalling show, because then you can sneak off to what you hope is a safe environment and go, boy, wasn't that terrible? And everybody else goes, yes, it really was.
The danger with Fringe is that you don't always know where the safe environment is.
Exactly.
You almost have to have that conversation right now, a block away, before anybody gets to the Fringe Club.
Yeah.
Before anybody who could overhear it.
Tim Hortons is usually safe.
Yeah.
I've just because artist types usually prefer a swankier coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
They prefer something quirkier or more offbeat or something like that. Like if you're going to the Fringe Club or you're going here or there, the Mulberry coffee shop is around the corner in Down James a little bit, and it's a favorite hangout of a lot of the artist types in the area.
Yeah.
Whereas a Tim Hortons is more mainstream, and so a lot of artists won't necessarily. There's one in particular on. I'm giving away my places, but there's one in particular on King Street, and it's kind of known as the biker Tims.
Okay.
There's a lot of biker chicks and biker dudes.
Okay.
And so nobody is in there who can possibly. And I've run lines in that Tim Hortons one time, which was kind of fun. A friend of mine, we were doing a production of Dr. Faustus last year. Mm-hmm. He was Faustus and I was Mephistophiles, and we went into this Tim Hortons and we just did the lines at a table in the Tims. It was very odd and very fun.
So your first Fringe experience was as a volunteer.
Volunteer, yeah.
What did you do for your first non-volunteer?
Non-volunteer was the next year, so it would have been 2009.
Yeah.
By my reckoning, I could be wrong, but 2009, and it was a play called A Modicum of Freedom, which I had written, and wound up being in sort of by accident.
Yeah.
And it was basically because I didn't know a lot of people in the area, and so even when we held auditions, we only got a very small handful of people out to auditions.
Right.
And so by the time it came down to cast parts, the director and I was talking to the director, and we were like, what about this guy? What about, and I said, I can do it.
Yeah.
I'll do it. And part of that was I suppose it was a trust issue where I'm just like, it's the first play that I'd written that was going up in front of people, solo written. I'd done some stuff in school, but and so I said, I want this to be the way that I want it to be, and whatnot. So I did that.
Yeah, it can be really hard to give up that.
It can be hard, but when you do it, it can yield wonderful results.
Yeah.
Because an actor, if you get a good actor, they are a creative force in a different mindset than you. And so, for instance, I did a Christmas show last year called Miracles Don't Come Cheap. And I remembered specifically one line in particular in that show where I nearly put in a parenthetical in the script. I nearly said sarcastically.
Right.
And I thought, you know what? It's up to the actor to do it how she wants. I took it right out. And wouldn't you know it, in rehearsals, the actor said it very genuine and heartfelt, and it still worked.
Yeah.
It just became a totally different moment, and I thought, what a wonderful thing to be able to see a moment that you had one way in your head work at a totally different way on stage that you never would have gotten if you were micromanaging and controlling and tried to beat it into them and add all these little stage directions that manipulate them and control them. And so if you get a great actor doing your work, or even one with who's a good actor but has a radically different perspective than you, you'll come up with stuff that you never would have imagined for your script.
Yeah. And that's kind of magic, that you can put words on a page and have somebody else see them entirely different, but it still works.
Yes. That's gold. And to me, that's the best thing. One of the best things about theater is that it is not like a novel is one person usually. Sometimes there's two, and to some extent you've got an editor kind of helping coax them along. But it's one person's vision. A painting is one artist is putting paint again. Usually, I imagine that there might actually be double painters somewhere. And I know some painters that, like Michelangelo employed and Rothko employed assistants to help them, but they would do stuff like prep canvases. It's not like they were doing the Sistine Chapel roof. Maybe they were. I don't know. I don't know that much about Michelangelo. His last name was Buonarroti.
I did not know that. There we go.
I did a project on him in high school, and I remember a couple little pieces of detail. Anyways, he went blind painting the Sistine Chapel, for instance. But I got way off track. Most artistic disciplines are one person's vision, but there's a handful of disciplines that have to be collaborative. Theater has to be collaborative, and only with a couple of rare instances otherwise. Even one man or one woman shows, one person shows, usually have a director. Sometimes they even have three. There's one writer, there's one performer, and there's one director. Sometimes it's all three the same one, but a lot of times it's multiple people's vision. A designer came in, a set designer, a choreographer, somebody else came in to put their own unique spin on it and to put their own thing, and I love that. Because it helps to remind you. I think it's a very easy profession to be in and allow your ego to coil around you and choke the life out of you. And nothing is better for you than to remember that it is not your sole work.
I actually find that as far as theater is concerned, it's one of the reasons why I have difficulty writing in another style, because I'm so used to theater writing where it's my job as a writer to leave empty spaces for somebody else to fill in.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't describe the set because the designer will do that. I don't tell the actor everything they're going to do and everything they're feeling because they figure it out. What's your theater background? When did you first get interested in theater?
I've been interested in my interest actually started. I wanted to be like a comedian, like a sketch comedian in particular. I would have been around 14 or 15 whenever young boys are discovering Monty Python. And I did, and thought, if that's a job, if there's a penguin on the telly and this parrot is dead, and if that's a profession, I want that profession. And so I the obvious thing to study then is theater, because I don't think they might offer them somewhere, but there's no real dedicated bachelor degree to be had in sketch comedy.
I think Humber College has a comedy course.
They might do.
But they're like the
rare
ones, right?
Anyways, even if there was, I feel like that's limiting yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I thought theater should be what and somewhere during my theater training, I was doing a show called, it was NZR, we pronounced it Nezer. And during that, it was a collective creation piece, and it was totally new and totally radical and bizarre and weird and fun and difficult and challenging. And I went, it's just as much fun tapping into the weird, the wild, the wonderful, and the dramatic as it is tapping into the comic. Tragedy is just as much fun, and I thought, basically that was, I think I was already leaning towards this general performance at that time, but that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. That was the point at which I went, I'm going to be a theater creator, not a sketch comedian. sketch comedian still on the table, perhaps,
Yeah.
but at that point I was like, no, writing and acting and performing and yes, theater creation.
I mean, when did you start writing? Around the same time? Or?
No, I started. The first thing that I wrote theatrically was actually before I went to university. My dad's a pastor, and so at the church, the youth group wanted to do a play, and that was like all they knew.
Oh,
And they had heard that I had interest in this kind of like theater, acting, performance type stuff. And so they said, do you want to try to write it? So I said, yeah, because when you're 16, you have nothing but hubris. Hubris and the illusion of invulnerability, which is an offset of hubris.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just more hubris by a different name. And so I said, yeah. And so basically what I did was I read a couple of, I think, Shakespeare plays, because he was one of the only playwrights that I knew the name of.
Of course, yeah.
Because I'm a teenager and I'm dumb. And so it was a 5-act structure, and it's like I based it, like the format was based off of whatever Shakespeare volume my parents had in the house.
Right.
So all this kind of stuff. And that was what I wrote. I wrote an adaptation of the Book of Job,
Okay.
which I actually recently dug out, I think a year and a half ago. And I was flipping through it, and I was like, a lot of this is quite naive in its execution, but some of it is surprisingly not that bad.
Yeah.
I mean, if I really went through it, I would probably cut it from its like 50-page length down to about like 25.
Right.
Which I also did recently with another script that I'd written a while ago, and it was 44 pages. And I just going through it, just reading through it and cutting whatever I felt was unnecessary, I like whacked it down to 21.
Yeah.
Just like that, just because I was such a different writer than I was 4 years ago.
That's also, I mean, that's easier to do when you have distance from something.
Yeah.
But if you, like, I find it so hard to do with something that I'm about to perform, but I've whittled away so much from my own production. And really because I'd be like, okay, I really like this piece. I really like this bit. So if I really like it, what's its reason for being there? Like, does it add to the structure, or is it is it just something that's there because I like it?
Yeah.
Oh, cut.
And I've heard the old adage, "Kill your darlings."
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things, it's kind of a similar thing. One of the things that I like to do when I'm stuck while writing is I write down my top 10 list of things that could never happen in this script. And 9 times out of 10, when you do that, you go, boy, numbers 3, 6, 7, and 9 look pretty good. I did it for the Fringe show that I was working on. As soon as I came up with my first outline of the show, I wrote down 4 or 5 things that can never happen in the show, and literally one of them, and I won't reveal which one because it actually would reveal a plot twist. Yeah. But one of them I actually did do. One of the things that I wrote down could never happen in anybody else. I did that thing.
Right.
I think on my second draft.
Nice. Yeah. Have you been to other Fringe festivals or just Hamilton?
I've been to Toronto's Fringe Festival a few times. I've both performed there and just gone as an audience member as well. But I think that's pretty much it. I always mean to get out and see London's Fringe, which is another one that's in reasonable proximity to me. Like, Ottawa and Montreal are kind of far away. Unless I was going to bring a show there, it's hard for me to commute into Ottawa and see a bunch of shows. You can't just
go there for a day. It's like,
exactly.
Well, you could, but I mean, like...
Yeah, I guess you could. You'd have to really want to go.
You really have to want to go. Like, I might go to Montreal, but I've been to Montreal Fringe, and I know what Montreal Fringe is.
Yeah. And I think Kitchener has one now as well.
Oh, cool.
So I feel like I should get out and see them, but it's the kind of thing where... And the other thing is, leading up to the Hamilton Fringe, I'm super busy. Yeah. So when Kitchener Fringe is going on, I'm like, I don't think that I have time to drive out there.
No.
Just because I'm editing and rehearsing and memorizing and trying to convince my child not to eat a crayon and just whatever else.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard because the festivals all sort of go
in a row. Which is convenient for the performers because if you get into multiple festivals, and they're really good in the CAFF, the Canadian Alliance of Fringe Festivals, where they line them up so that you can go, with a couple of exceptions, and there's some hiccups here and there, but you can mostly go like East Coast to West Coast, just like one after the other, like boom, 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 boom. Yeah. And if you by some miracle got into all of them, you actually could do all the Fringe shows.
There are a couple of conflicts. I think that Calgary and Saskatoon happen at the same time.
Yeah, there's a couple of bumps.
But generally, you could start in Montreal, go right across to Victoria, Vancouver.
I think even Halifax. I think you could start in Halifax.
The Atlantic Fringe happens in the fall.
Oh, in the fall, okay.
Mostly. So that sort of they're their own little circuit, so you can sort of push across and then go back.
Right.
But each fringe is so different.
Yeah.
And each fringe has its own personality that it's kind of fun to get out. And you'll never know it in a day.
No.
But you really know it if you get to perform there. Like if you get to perform there, you'll know that fringe really well.
Yeah.
And Montreal. You ever get a chance to do a show in the Montreal Fringe?
I would jump because I've never been to Montreal and I would love to go.
It is of all of the fringes that I've been to, and I've done Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton. Montreal is by far the warmest fringe. Like the most welcoming and the warmest fringe. I would recommend that one.
You know what? I won't. Obviously, because I haven't been, I have no experience. I won't knock Montreal. I think, in my opinion, you're going to find Hamilton to be pretty warm too.
Cool. That's good.
Now, some of that is my opinion as a native.
Of course. Yeah.
I live here, so maybe that's my perspective. But the first couple of years of doing it, I remember thinking, they're very, very nice and very accommodating. And particularly if you make even a small effort to plug in on the Facebook group, which you have been doing, which is how I heard about this, the people are willing to and there's a lot of people that are willing to just like let you come and see their show, for instance. Every year I'll offer standby tickets to artists. So they have to wait until like 10 minutes before the show time. If it's sold out, they're out of luck. But if it's not, then artists will get in for free, because I very much believe that if you're here at the Fringe and I'm here at the Fringe, let's see each other's shows.
One of my favorite things that I've ever seen at a Fringe was a guy in a line. He was flying a line.
Yeah.
And he's talking to somebody and he said, "I can't go to your show because I already got tickets for this show." And the guy was like, "Oh, well, when can you go see your show?" And the guy said, "Okay, I can go at 2 o'clock." And the guy said, "Okay, so 2 o'clock, there's this show and this show. What do you like?" And he helped this person choose a show from the shows that he'd seen.
Yeah.
Your biggest promoters at a Fringe festival are other performers, which I think is amazing.
I've done that.
Yeah.
I've done that. People have said to me, like, I'm coming to see your show on Saturday and what looks good, and I'll tell them, this and this and this.
Yeah.
I like to open it up to the audience at the end of every show and say, does anybody here have a show they want to plug?
Yeah.
Because we're all in the same boat. We're all looking to draw audience, and the last thing I want is to create an environment where we're all bludgeoning each other, trying to take each other's audience. No, let's share them around. Let's make sure that it mixes up.
Going into Montreal Fringe, somebody said there is audience enough for everyone.
Yeah.
And I do believe that.
Yeah.
I believe that not just about Fringe, but about indie theater in general, that we don't need to covet our audience, because our audience would go to see other indie stuff and also still be our audience.
Especially at Fringe, where
Absolutely.
it costs you less than $15 to see a show.
Yeah.
You can see 4 or 5 and still not have hit the premium seat pricing of some of the bigger theaters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then again, at a maximum running time of an hour and a half, unless you're looking at some of the bring your own venues or something like that, which theoretically could go longer, though I don't think they ever really do.
Not usually.
But at most of them are an hour. It's not even a big time investment.
No, I actually find that for me, there's sometimes been a barrier at the 90-minute mark.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to see a 90-minute show, I sort of at the 60-minute mark. That's when I'm starting to get antsy, because at a Fringe I'm so used to seeing the hour-long stuff.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of 90-minute stuff that really didn't need to be 90 minutes.
Yeah.
But at an hour for $10 or under $15, even if it's not awesome, you haven't missed all that much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and even then, a lot of the 90 minutes are actually around 75 or 80 minutes, so that's not too bad. But you're right. When it starts to drag, it starts to drag.
Yeah. You refer to yourself as a Hamilton native. Are you a person who was born here and lived here for many years?
I've lived here for a long time now. That's why I say I'm native here. I'm not native here in that I was not born here. I did not grow up here. But I kind of have roots here because my mom grew up in Dundas, so that's right next door.
Yeah.
And my dad grew up, I'm trying to remember if they actually lived in Dundas or if it was just an area, but also grew up in the area. And then they both moved or he moved to Tobacco at some point, I think, and but they started out here. They went to high school together here, and hung out. You know, I remember driving with my dad at some point recently in the last like 4 or 5 years down Martin Street. And he commented, "Oh, such and such a bar is still there. I would have thought that had closed by now." And you know, like this kind of stuff. So he still remembered the area, and they still have friends in the area where they would say, their friends would say, "What are the kids up to?" And they say, "Jody and Ryan bought a house in the North End," and their friends would go, "Oh, really?" And mom and dad would have to go, "It's changed a lot since we were kids." They're like, no, they're safe, because immediately, and there are still sections of the North End that are quite forbidding, let's say. Yeah. Where we are is lovely, but mom and dad would have to say, no, they're fine, they're safe.
What brought you to Hamilton?
I went to school at Redeemer, which is a little tiny university in Ancaster, and my wife got a job working in St. Joe's Hospital here. She's a nurse. And so we just kind of went, let's hang around and see what's good. And from there, it became a very convenient location because I get work out in Cambridge, Kitchener, Waterloo. I've gotten the occasional work in Toronto. I get a lot of work in Hamilton. And it turns out you can get a lot of places from Hamilton.
Right.
So Toronto's a major theater hub. That's a 45-minute drive. Kitchener, I found a surprising amount of work out there. That's a 50, 60-minute drive.
Yeah.
Hamilton is right here, so there's a lot of access.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, to a lot of locations. So that's why I guess I've kind of stayed here. And on top of that, it's been a really, really great town.
Yeah.
Like it is, I got a friend who describes it as he says it's either the biggest small town in the world or the smallest big town in the world. And I would tend to agree, and I actually have described it before as like when you watch a movie, non-mainstream, little B-movie, independent kind of thing, but it blows your mind, and you start telling all of your friends like you were hired to do promotion for the thing. Yeah. I find that Hamilton is kind of like that. You get here and you're like, there's a lot of cool stuff going on. There's a lot of cool indie art movements going on. There's art crawl, what? Super crawl. Like you start going gonzo about all this stuff going on here, and you start telling everybody like, no, it's got its own cool vibe that you got to come check out.
And that, I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people don't know. Although people from Hamilton have been like talking about that for quite a while, but if you're not from here and you're not really plugged in, you wouldn't know about it.
And you've got to make a little bit of an effort, because I've had talked to people who have come in for one project, and they come in, they do the show, whether it's a rock show or a theater show, and they kind of commute home every day, and you talk to them and they're like, yeah, it's kind of scuzzy and whatnot, and you're like, yeah, that's just because you just drove through. Yeah. You didn't take a look. Yeah. And if you take a look, you find neat stuff. And I'm kind of convinced that anywhere you go, if you take a look, you'll find neat stuff everywhere. You'll find great people and great stuff going on. And yeah, every city's got its downsides, but you're going to find some interesting things going on.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I would be surprised if there was a city in the world that didn't have something gunning for it.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I would include the most rundown, plague-infested, tragic third world kind of city. I would say there's something there. Yeah. I bet you not everybody lives here just because they grew up here. I bet you some people live here because they believe in this place for a reason.
I know people who've come here. Yeah. I know people who've come here for the arts community and for all that stuff. So I know that happens. I'm really kind of excited to see it. Because coming from Toronto, there's a certain idea of what Hamilton is.
I've run across that idea. I've talked to a lot of Hamiltoners. One of the weirdest things is every now and then you tell people that you're an artist in Hamilton. This hasn't happened to me in a while now, but you tell people you're an artist in Hamilton, and they go, "Do they have arts there?" As though for some reason, like the geographical location was anathema to culture. Yeah, and you're like, yeah.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that I mean, when you're thinking from a kind of an elitist point of view, that's obviously something you would think. But then when you really sort of sit back and think about it, culture comes from the place. Yeah. And that's why each place's culture is unique. So of course, the culture in a place like Hamilton is going to be different from like Toronto or somewhere else, but that's kind of what makes it cool.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I don't mean to say that like Toronto are a bunch of jerks,
No.
or anything like that. I don't mean to say that it's snobby. I think that a lot of times it was just that they just didn't know about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't coming from a place of arrogance. It was just coming from a place of like, I mean, if you exist in the arts scene in Toronto, that's got to be a 24-hour-a-day occupation.
It becomes your garden. That's your world. So you don't look outside of that very often.
Exactly. There's no need to go anywhere else because it's quite fulfilling in its own right. So then when you kind of walk out of there for a little bit, you're like, oh, right, there would be other hubs.
Yeah.
And again, I don't mean to say this. It's naive or it's ignorant or anything like that. I just think that it's just because you wouldn't need to look any further if you're looking to satiate your artistic drive, whether it's creating or just consuming culture. You don't need to go more than a block.
No.
So
I think it can be a good thing to look outside of ourselves, though.
It's a great thing.
You know, it's a good idea to look, and especially look to a place that's closer than we think.
Yeah, and I had a guy. I've had people be very surprised at how close it is.
Yeah.
And I had one guy who was surprised at how far it was. I was giving him a ride back. We'd been in Toronto doing a show, and he was coming down here to stay overnight for a couple of days. And he said, do you mind if I catch a ride in with you? And I said, sure, absolutely. And so we're driving back, and he was like, how far is it? And I was like, it's like a 45-minute drive. And he's like, no kidding. He had, for some reason, geographically, he had Hamilton basically in the same places like Mississauga, Etobicoke, or Vaughan, or like he thought it was like a suburb almost, like right abutted up against it. And he admitted that he was like, I'm from the East Coast, and so I wasn't really aware of the geography of the area. And then I joked and I laughed and I said, when we get to Hamilton, you're going to see a lot of scooters. And he was like, what? And I don't know if you've noticed it, but there are a lot of those little like rascal. They're like for old people to get around, right?
Yeah.
Tons of them.
I noticed that on. I was in town for the last art crawl.
Yeah.
And I came in a little early, and I noticed that.
Tons of them.
Like, yeah. I was like, why are there so many?
Nobody knows. It's part of Hamilton. It's like the Tiger Cats and the art crawl. It's just there are scooters.
Do you have a favorite thing about the Hamilton Fringe?
I would point back to what I said earlier about it. It's very accommodating. It's very friendly. I really like that. It's nice to see it bubble up. It's been growing seemingly exponentially the last few years, which is kind of nice. I like that it's big. There's a lot of stuff going on, and yet it's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
You go to Toronto and there are 150 shows. Yeah. And that's besides the art exhibits and the musical demonstrations and whatever's going on at the Fringe tent, and there's tons of stuff. Yeah. And that's fantastic. But you've got no hope of seeing it all. I actually know a guy, I'm pretty sure since the Fringe's inception, Tom is his name, he goes to every show every year. I don't know how he does it, but he must sit down and come up with his schedule for the rest of the entire 10 days, and he sees everything. And
you would have to have like a very careful
meticulous.
Absolutely. You have no time to waste.
Exactly. And it's great talking to him at the after party. You go to the Fringe after party, you sit down with him, because you go, what was the best show? What was the worst show? What did you love? And I love asking people what the worst show was. I don't know why. Maybe it's Schadenfreude, and maybe it's professional jealousy, but there's something about it just being like, what did you hate?
Yeah.
And some years it's a different one for everybody, and other years everybody says it was this one.
It's funny because Toronto has its own. The Hamilton Fringe can be intimidating for many different reasons.
Yeah.
But having been to the Winnipeg and Edmonton Fringe, which are huge.
Yeah,
the Toronto
gargantuan.
Fringe is like, the Toronto Fringe is like, oh, that small thing. Because the Edmonton Fringe is like, I don't know, like 300 companies.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculously huge. But
and I imagine there's exponentially more peripheral events as well.
Oh, you can actually go to the Edmonton Fringe, and some people go for the buskers and the food tents. And that's what they go for.
Yeah.
And the fact that there's a theater festival as well, they don't even notice.
Yeah.
But there's
and I love
everything.
I love watching them grow, but I do still like a let's call it maybe like a manageable bite.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't actually taken the time to really look at what the venues are.
Yeah.
And I sort of went through today, and I was like, oh wait, there's really, aside from the BYOVs, there's really 4 venues in Hamilton, about 4, plus the BYOVs, plus the miniseries.
Yeah.
And that's a manageable fringe.
Yeah.
That's like...
Most of them... I'm sorry, I'm laughing about that. Most of them were walking distance, and I was laughing to myself because a friend of mine quoted a comedian today, it was my dad yesterday, was quoting a comedian who said, if you have the time, anywhere is within walking distance.
That's true.
But that said, I think you could hike from one venue, from the furthest venue to the furthest venue, probably in 20-25 minutes.
Yeah, the only one that feels really far to me is the staircase.
And that's a BYOV.
From here, that's a BYOV.
And last year they were involved as a BYOV too, and this year they've basically done the same thing.
Yeah.
Which is that not just that they are a BYOV, but that there are like a half a dozen shows there.
Yeah.
And so it kind of becomes its own little mini hub.
Yes. Yeah.
There was a touring show that I did a while ago. Do we have to move for sound reasons?
We might have to just
do a pause and.
We'll keep it running. We'll just
okay.
Just run outside.
Yeah. So there was a touring show that I did a while ago. We went up to Thunder Bay.
Okay.
And Thunder Bay is one of these places where 2 cities existed, and eventually their borders expanded until it was one city.
Okay.
And you kind of wound up with 2 downtown cores, which were sort of rival to one another.
Right.
Now, I didn't sense a big rivalry between the downtown Hamilton Fringe venues and the Staircase.
Okay.
But the Staircase became its own kind of it's a second main hub last year.
What's kind of interesting about that is that there was a similar thing that happened in the Toronto Fringe a few years ago. There was a venue called Bread and Circus.
Yeah.
And Bread and Circus sort of ran its own fringe venue where they did what Staircase did. And sort of they became their own hub, and they had their own little festival, they were their own little venue. And you know what? In most fringe festivals in Canada, that's not unusual. That's in Edmonton, there's La Cité, and so the school, the French school, is its own venue with 2 theaters. There's all these venues, and they're curated.
Yeah.
So somebody applies to those, and so people did this for that one too. And after a couple of years, the Toronto Fringe's response to that was to make that impossible. So you couldn't do that anymore. You had to, if you're going to do BYOV, you had to show that your show could only be done in that location.
Yeah, and this year is the first year that the Hamilton Fringe made a distinction on applications between a BYOV and a site-specific.
Yeah,
and I actually really like that model where they say you can have a BYOV or you can have a site-specific, or both, I suppose, in a way. But yeah, you can say... And I think that's great because it allows for maximum possibilities.
Yeah,
it allows for somebody to do that.
There's definitely a lot of possibility there. You have there's a lot of choice there. I know in some of the cities where they do, this style of BYOV, some of the people's favorite shows end up being at the BYOV. That becomes the place to go. Partially because in some cities, like in Edmonton, for example, there's so many shows.
Yeah.
And it's such a crapshoot. Some people are just not willing to go through the crapshoot of, is this show in a regular venue going to be any good, or do I go to this curated venue where I know that it's going to be good?
And I'm not sure exactly how Colette Kendall runs the Staircase. I'm not sure exactly how she picks those shows. My understanding is that a lot of them just approached her, and so I'm not sure exactly what kind of judiciary process she has for, or if she just says, "Yeah, here's the cut that I get, and come on down." I don't know what that is, but because I've never done that option. Not that I wouldn't, but just that I haven't.
You haven't had to,
and so I don't really know what her deal is exactly, how she selects those, or if she even does select them.
What venue is your show in?
Theatre Aquarius. We're at the Aquarius venue.
That's the biggest venue in the Fringe, isn't it? That in terms of seating.
I don't know, because it's not. We're not in the main space. Okay. They don't do that. They do the black box theater there. So that seats. It's got a 75 seat capacity, and they have the potential to add more.
Okay.
Which I have had the wonderful fortune to be able to do it.
That's good. When somebody says that their show's at Theatre Aquarius, in my mind, it's like in like the main
space. That would kill you.
Yeah.
Because that's like I think it's like 800 seats or something like that. You would die, because a decent Fringe audience, not great, but a decent Fringe audience, you can get by with like 30, 40 people.
Yeah.
In an 800 seat theater, you're dead.
No.
They did use that space 1 year, but they didn't use the main audience. They built risers. Well, they didn't build them, but they put in risers and made a 3/4 thrust stage on the stage.
Okay.
So everybody, audience and performers, were all on the stage, and they did it that way, which worked as well.
In Winnipeg, at the Manitoba Theatre Centre, they do use the main space, but they curtain it.
Yeah.
So that instead of like 800 seats, you have like 250, which is still...
That's still immense,
shit.
yeah.
Like that's... You know, when
that's
you're doing a show, it is intimidating, but if you can feel it, great. But man, if you can't, if you get like what would be a generous Fringe audience,
if
like
you got
30 people, feels like nothing.
I mean, I'm at a 75 seat venue.
Yeah.
If I get 100 people, they have to add chairs.
Yeah.
And that would be I'd be over the moon.
Absolutely.
100 people in a 250 seat house is less than half.
That's
And particularly, I do a lot of comedies. If you're packed in, elbow to elbow with a bunch of other patrons all loving it, and you're all laughing, nothing is better for comedy, and nothing is worse than when you're all spread out, you're not near anybody, you don't feel like laughing, and it kills every joke, and you just want to die.
Like and a lot of good Fringe houses are like 20 to 30 people.
Yeah.
In a big venue, that's...
I've heard it said that a decent opener, you're okay if you open to like 20, 25 people. At that point, it's got a bill, but you're okay if that's the case. And that's where I set my goal every year. I want to open to 20, 25 people, and I always somehow manage to pessimistically convince myself that nobody's coming on opening night.
Well, I mean that is the you don't know.
Yeah, you've got no way of knowing.
You don't know until you get out on that stage. Who's there? You can't really check the box office to see how the show's doing.
No, you can't. Well, maybe there's a way. I don't know. I've never asked.
You know, in Edmonton, it was the only place where you could.
Yeah.
And you could log in and see how many tickets you'd sold. And fuck that! That destroyed it for me, because you would end up like sitting there obsessively checking how many people were coming to your show.
I was about to say, I would hate that. I'm super glad to not have access, or to think, at least believe that I do not have access to those numbers, because the worst feeling in the world would be logging and be like, how many people? One person for the one show I have at 7:30. You know what I mean? Like just 2 years ago, we were offering artist complimentary tickets, artist tickets. They just had to email us and ask us for them. Now, we were very lenient. I would go up to the box office and I would say, hey, let people in anyway, even if they're not on my list. Let artists, if they're Fringe artists, let them in.
Is there like a Fringe identifier, like an artist identifier? Or?
No, it's they moved it over to like a password system recently.
That's pretty common actually in a lot of Fringe festivals, the password.
And I think that's why they did it. It's 3 years ago, Claire Kalman started running the Fringe, and I think she was more familiar with kind of Toronto models and other models. And she brought in a couple of aspects of that, like she got rid of it was their second year, I think, that she got rid of the badges and just moved it over to a password system and whatnot. Anyways, so last year or 2 years ago we had we had this system where you would just post a message on our Fringe page, or on our Facebook page, and we would put you on our list.
Yeah.
And as luck would have it, nobody had done so. Like, they just, for whatever reason, had not done so. And so I had convinced myself that meant that of all the artists that I know in the city, which is a bundle, none of them are interested in seeing my show. which means if my friends, my nearest and dearest, aren't willing to see the show for free, that means nobody's coming. So I literally sat on my couch in my living room for, I think, like an hour or two in the afternoon, just staring into space, totally despondent, absolutely had convinced myself that literally nobody, and I'm not one of these people who uses that word facetiously, I know that it means an absolute, a truth. Literally, I had convinced myself that literally nobody was coming to see the show, that I would get there and they would go, sorry, we didn't sell any tickets, what do you want to do? And I'd be like, well, I want to go home and take up drinking. And then somebody comes backstage. It's opening night, and I'm not looking. I'm in the green room. I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere near the audience, because if I hear so much as one cricket, I'm gonna, I'm gonna start measuring my neck. And lo and behold, our venue tech comes back and she says, we have to add chairs. We oversold, and then I had to calm down because I got so giddy.
Well, that's your best case scenario, right?
That was the best case scenario, and it was quite a roller coaster that first day.
I had there was a story when I was at the Winnipeg Fringe. I can't remember the guy's name. He had this drag queen character, and he'd been there a year before, and he got this review that was so bad that nobody went to see the show. Or at least, like, the main reviewer for the main newspaper.
I think I heard about that.
Like, hated the show because, I don't know, he used bad language or something, and, like, gave him the worst review. So the next year, knowing that he had to combat that, he was the hardest working guy I have ever seen. He was out every day, all day, and as part of his show, he would say, okay, so how many of you here are here because you saw me on the street today?
Yeah.
And, like, 90% of the house raised their hands. And
that was a fast lesson that I learned early on going to Fringe festivals. If you don't hit those lines, hand out cards, shake people's hands, nobody's coming.
Yeah.
Your friends, your family, your mom's coming.
Your mom will come, but that's not enough to
and your lead actor's mom is coming. But nobody else.
Yeah.
And so you've got to hit those lines.
Yeah.
And over the years, you discover, this is something, I don't think over the years, I also discovered really fast, you can't do it inauthentically.
Yeah.
No.
You can't pass it a bunch of cards and say, come see my show, come see my show, come see my show, it's great. And then, leave. Nobody's coming.
No.
You have to talk to people. You have to give them a reason. You have to give them a face. Because the difference between them coming and not coming is them caring about you.
Yeah. It's funny because for me, that's the hardest part of
absolutely.
Is like going up and talking to people.
Yeah. I hate that.
Yeah.
I often enjoy once the conversation gets going. I have had some wonderful conversations and I've met some wonderful, beautiful people.
Yeah, but that initial walking up to somebody
absolutely
and engaging in a conversation.
Especially that moment when you know it's all on the line.
Yeah.
And so you have to talk to all these people, and they're in a conversation, and you're like, boy, I feel like a real jerk.
Yeah.
But at some point, you kind of have to interrupt, and then you have to win them over. You have to. That's almost a play in and of itself.
Well, yeah.
You have to interrupt people having a good time, having a conversation among friends. You're coming up to sell them something, and you have to make them like you in 30 seconds or less.
Yeah.
Or they are never coming to see your show.
No,
they're actually gonna circle it in the Fringe guide and go, that guy was a jerk. I'm not coming to see his show.
There's a fine line about walking up to somebody.
And I've seen people screw themselves out of a ticket, out of a sale, by doing it wrong. I've seen them hit the line wrong. One of the most egregious examples was somebody who tried to pass out their card while I was still talking to somebody, passing out my card, and should have known better. Knew who I was, and it's just come around later.
Obvious that somebody is passing out the card. It's okay to go after them, but do not interrupt.
No, it was and you could see it in the other person's eyes how rude they thought that person was being, even though they didn't know me and they didn't know this other person.
Doesn't matter.
They just went, well, that was kind of rude.
Their impression now of that person is that he's a dick.
Yeah. That was kind of rude.
So we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you for your show. Were you personally? Are you on social media? You have a website?
We have both of those things. Make Art Theatre has a Facebook page. From there, you can get to our website, but that would be makearttheatre.weebly.com. And that will will get access to all of our up and coming shows as well.
Great.
Because we'll be doing further projects down the line.
Perfect.
Check your local listings.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for doing this. Thanks for being accommodating on my scheduling.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.